welcome everyone
Yeah,
to our first and hopefully,
the first of a long series.
yeah,
As,
Chicken Care 101.
yeah, as we were writing this,
We were hoping to actually break this down into probably only a few episodes, but we kind of started on a plane and quickly realized that there is a lot of information.
not just that, there's just tons of topics to sort of consider. So
yeah, so we decided to start the first one with just nutrition.
Yeah.
It was going to be a little bit more than that, but nutrition is actually quite a large topic.
Yeah, yeah, it's really big, and it's fundamental to everything that we're going to talk about going forward, and it's one of the biggest things that we can actually do for the chicks in terms of health. So we figured it'd be a great place to start. And I just want to remind everybody that this is just 101. Okay, it's not. I'm not going to delve too much into the weeds. Hopefully, I give everybody a little bit of something so that they feel like they can take something home. But it is the basics. But in my opinion, working with chicks the way I have, you'd be surprised on how important doing that 80% right is. You know, most of it is the bare bones basics, as in if you master those, everything else really falls into place over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess we should probably start off by introducing ourselves for those of you who don't really know us.
Or would like to get to know us better. How about that?
Right. Well, we're Avian Empire. So this is Sam and Gemma. We have really different backgrounds. So I'll let Sam explain a little bit about himself and why he's maybe qualified to talk to you about chickens.
Yeah, I'm qualified to talk to you at all. Fair enough. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm not a local. I come from Canada. I did my first university degree up in Canada. I was in wildlife ecology. So I spent a lot of time in the mountains, kind of studying wildlife and doing wildlife plans. And that sort of transitioned to more animal welfare studies and then into vet school, where I came down to New Zealand to do. I did my degree at Massey, and then I did a master's with the University of Melbourne, sort of online, sort of in person, and that was just on avian health and medicine. And since then, I've been working, so I graduated at the end of 2012. And since then, I've been working specifically or almost solely with chickens. So I do a lot of the sort of commercial farms, free range, hatcheries, all those egg layers, broilers, breeders. So I take care of probably upwards of 180 to maybe 200 million birds a year. So I see a lot of issues. I do a lot of training. And so over the years, I've sort of studied up on the chicken, which is a well-researched animal. It's probably the number one researched animal we have. Probably fruit flies is probably number two. But and there's a lot of technical information on chickens, and in so doing, a lot of the avian medicine for other species has come from chickens as well, which is quite interesting. So it is kind of the root of a lot of the sort of avian sciences and bird sciences. It all kind of comes from our understanding of that. So that's kind of how I got my start. We branched off into some conservation and some wildlife and stuff, and pet birds and things here.
Yeah, that falls more into my category.
Yeah, well, we're complementary in a lot of ways, to be fair.
Yeah, so my background is actually in fashion design, which is a fairly unusual start, but I had a bit of a career change a few years back when I started working in rehab, but I've actually been working in rehab for probably about eight or 9 years now, just either on a volunteer basis or paid managing. I've worked quite a number of the big rehabs in the country, so looking after native and non-natives has always been my big thing. Sam actually came to my rescue when I first started looking after Wellington Bird Rehab Trust.
Well, that's how Avian Empire was born.
Yeah, really. And that's how we kind of started up.
We realized she was asking me a lot of avian health questions via video chat, and we were like, well, actually, hey, you know what? We can do this. we can do this as a service for other people.
So we started up our telemedicine, so we can help anyone from anywhere.
Yep.
Well, as best we can.
It's not a complete service, obviously. Like, we can't do a lot of hands-on and diagnostics, but between the two of us and our experience and our ongoing sort of education and the people that help us too, we've got a lot of support from labs and a lot of the industries and stuff. We're able to kind of offer that as a service to people, and we hope it just makes it a little bit easier for everybody to get a little bit of maybe some trusted opinions, if not some good advice. So.
Yeah. All right. Without further ado.
Yeah, we've got a little PowerPoint, so we're going to do this a little bit different. You should still be able to see us, but if you have any questions, again, just pop it in the chat, and we will try to answer them either as we go, or if we feel like it needs to go to the end, we'll put the questions at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So hopefully most of you could still see us.
Okay.
We may have to just put the chat up on one of those, or you can put this one as a smaller one. Okay, so chicken care 101. We're going to start with nutrition. Like I said, it's the basis of everything. So we'll go from there, and we'll build as we go. Okay. Nutrition, so the bare bone basics. Animals acquire energy and nutrients that they need to grow and live. And it's all about eating food. And there's 6 main components of the nutrition that we're going to consider. There'll be some other topics as well that I'll cover, but I think a really good understanding of these and the important parts of these will kind of show you why it's important to do this right from day one. Okay. I've got notes, but I will talk a little bit to the side of them, probably fairly often. I'm a bit chatty when it comes to this topic. So.
And I'll try to push you along.
and Gemma will try to keep me on the railroad tracks.
All right. Here's the foundations.
Yeah. So we'll cover those 6 topics first. All right. So water. The most important and most often overlooked nutrient. We'll talk about nutrition for, the solid pellets and what's in the pellets and all the food that they want to eat. But if you're not doing the water right, you will have problems. Okay. Some of the best rules I can think of for water is if you're not going to be able to drink out of the same container as them, it's an old farming adage that, then that probably bowl or that water should be clean. They were kind of require this exact same water quality as we do. So making sure that you're having those parts of your coop or those parts of your run or those parts of your farm working and operating properly and cleanly. And hygiene, super important. Okay. So chickens drink about twice as much water as food intake. And more than that when they're hot. So some of the examples would be like a shaver or a highline bird that's in full egg production will eat a formulated pellet, about 120 to 130 grams of that pellet, and twice that on a normal day for water. So they'll drink upwards of 300 mils per bird per day. So it's a huge one.
We've got a good question there. Air sacs, where are they?
Oh, okay.
They're all over the place.
Yeah. So a bird is designed to have weight-saving adaptations to its body. And air sacs provide a very sort of cost-effective way of getting a lot of air exchange into the body for not a lot of biological investment. So they're literally 1 cell thick, and you have cranial, middle, caudal, 2 to 3 lobes on each side, sometimes more. The air sacs will actually permeate into like some of the bones, the long bones, like the humerus and the femur and
stuff.
Your
respiratory system is quite different to ours. I mean, they do have the lungs, but the
lungs are static.
They're static. They don't really work like our lungs do.
They don't expand. All the expansion and air movement comes from the inflation of the air sacs and deflation of the air sacs. And so chickens don't sweat. For them to cool down, they have to evaporate water off of their system, so out of their air sacs. And you may notice when a chicken is hot, they'll open their mouth and their throat will actually flutter a little bit when it's really hot. or they could pant a little bit, and that's just them trying to
Cool off.
exchange water.
A little bit like dogs.
Yeah, a little bit like panting with dogs, or like how you can cool something off by spritzing it down. But it also means that they're very sensitive to humidity changes. But that's for another day. All right. The number 2 thing.
Carbohydrates, my favorite thing.
So the important takeaway from this one is, right now, hey. And just on that point, we've got to apologize because, we had COVID last week, so we had to push everything. So if we get a little croaky, I've got my tissues and stuff. Just
we're trying our best.
Yeah, we're doing our best. But one of the things is chickens eat to meet their energy demand. Okay, so that means doesn't matter what they're eating, they need a certain amount of energy to maintain their metabolism, their general sort of health. And they will take that from whatever food you give them. So they can either pull it from things like carbohydrates or fats or proteins. So your macro sort of ingredients. Anybody who does any dieting will be very familiar with those. Yep. It's the exact same thing with chickens.
And you'll find that chickens are quite particular about where they can get those things the fastest as well.
Yeah, energy, the things that provide them the biggest energy is usually what they go for first. They have to meet those basic requirements. And then after that, everything can fall into place after that. But saying that, it doesn't mean they always necessarily choose the best things for them. It's just like humans.
Like children.
And children, they will eat the stuff that they...
Sometimes adults.
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. But they will choose stuff that maybe isn't the best, doesn't have the best sort of nutrient spectrum. And they will selectively eat some of these things if given the opportunity.
Why do they eat polystyrene, Sam?
Okay. Chickens are also like amazingly curious and intelligent creatures. All right. I say the intelligence thing sometimes with a grain of salt, but they're curious. They explore their environment with their beak. It's just like dogs and babies and stuff too. And a lot of them have a very high food drive. Which is where a lot of the commercial lines came from. They selected birds that were very sort of driven to pull food off of the ground and stuff. And so they will look for things that they think will be either A, interesting, or B, tasty, or C, poisonous. They will actually go out and sort of hunt those down. Yeah. And they're quite intuitive with what they sort of need or what they're feeling, as most animals are. So bearing that in mind, fats are have much more energy. So 9 calories per gram versus 4. My apologies if I fall into sort of empirical stuff. That's a bit of like pounds or things like that. That's a bit of sort of where I'm from. So.
And Christine, that's why she's saying sunflower seeds, why they get eaten first, and fats is pretty much essentially why. Sunflower seeds are
super high in fats. Yeah. We'll get to that sort of reason why some of these grains become a bit of an issue over time. But the main takeaway here is that fats are composed of a lot of little subunits called fatty acids. And these fatty acids are used for almost a whole bunch of things, hormones like thyroid hormones, reproductive hormones, but they also the building block of every cell in the body. Okay. And there's one fat in particular that is quite limiting for a lot of birds. And so if they're not getting that, they don't produce, their hormones don't work right. So sometimes with things like birds not coming into lay property, not having enough linoleic acid in the diet is one of the big ones. Okay, so it's something that you should be looking at on the label of any pellet or anything that you're buying. If that's not supplemented in there, or they don't have ingredients that have a lot of that in there, it's something that you're going to need to really think about adding yourself. Okay. And then there's fat soluble vitamins, your A, D, E, and K. Those are absorbed through fat digestion. So you need other fats in the diet to get those vitamins in there. They kind of sublimate together, or they're miscible together, and then they get taken up that way. And then we have proteins. So proteins are made up of amino acids, and as they get digested, they get broken down back into those amino acids, and those amino acids are absorbed. And amino acids can be a bit different for every animal. Every animal has a different range of essential and non-essential amino acids. The difference is essential is something they can't manufacture themselves. So the amino acid has to come from the diet and taken up. The other amino acids can all come from the other amino acids. So if you have too much of one, the body has a metabolism set up where it can actually change that into the amino acid that they need. So they have certain amino acids that are essential. I won't go into those all, but the two that are critical are your methionine and your lysine. Those ones tend to be the big ones for muscle production and feather growth. Okay.
As we all know, is very important during molt time, because regrowing back feathers is very hard job.
A lot of energy, a lot of protein goes into that. So when you're looking at your diets, the ones that you need to, we may have other people that need to come in. Can we do this on this one?
Yeah.
Just give us 1 sec. We're going to see if we can let a few more people in. There we go. And we'll get back to the show.
Yeah.
All right. So when you're looking at labels on the food are pretty important. They do put things on there that you need to kind of understand. But there's a little trick that we do with chickens regarding crude protein, okay? We put a percentage on the labels, but that percentage doesn't tell you what that protein is. It's crude for that reason. It can be anything, and it may not include a lot of methionine and lysine. Right? It just may not. So one of the tricks that some of the people who formulate pellets do is they include a higher proportion of crude protein with the hopes that you have enough methionine and lysine in there and some of those other essentials to sort of meet the demand of the chicken. It's a bit of a cheat. And what happens with those extra proteins is that they don't get used. Some of them do. They'll get burned for energy, but a lot of it just becomes waste. And so you'll end up with a lot of problems with extra sort of protein in the droppings, and that can cause things like ammonia and pad burn and things like that. Okay, just that one. So that's what we call the law of minimum. Okay, so with crude protein, all they're trying to do is build that barrel up high as they can to hold as much of the sort of essential amino acids and minerals and stuff that they need. So they can also do other things like add amino acids, like sometimes synthetic amino acids can be added to a formulated pellet just to meet those needs. It's much more expensive to do it that way, but it is a lot better for the bird. Okay, so deficiency in amino acids will lead to decreased health and production. There's no two ways about it. If they're having issues with methionine or lysine, you will have difficulties molting. You will have difficulties growing those birds for meat. You will have difficulties producing eggs. Those are your limiting factors. Okay, so in a formulated pellet, or if you're doing your own diet for your chook, you have to really consider how much of those you have in there. Okay. So if these supplements aren't used, the crude protein is increased to meet this demand, but this can lead to other issues like wastage, pad burn, ammonia. And a lot of people like to use fish meal.
They use it because it's cheap.
And it's cheap because it doesn't have a long shelf life and because it's difficult to keep it from going off. Yeah. Okay, so you've got to get rid of it, which means you offer it at a discount. And then you try to pellet it or try to use it as fast as you can before it becomes rancid.
It's great filler.
It is great filler.
And it's fine.
If you can do it, it's good.
Fine if you kind of know the start of the chain to the end of the chain where everyone is kind of storing their things correctly.
And it's local.
It's local. You're storing your food correctly and you're doing all your things and everyone else is doing their things. It's fine. But if you don't really know where your fish meal is coming from or how long it's been sitting around, or if you maybe don't have the best methods for storing your pellets, then I would probably reconsider the use or having it used in your pellets. Yeah.
So, and the limit is 5%. Anything above that and everything starts taking a real fishy flavor.
Unless you like fishy tasting eggs.
Yeah. Yeah,
and then it's fine.
Then it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. It doesn't tend to be something people enjoy, but yeah, I'm not going to presume anything. Okay.
Does omega-3 transfer
Yeah.
through the eggs?
Yeah,
From
fatty
fish?
acids. Yeah, fatty acids. You can actually make. There's a process where you can increase the omega-3s and a few other of the fat solubles in your eggs to make them more transferable to humans too.
So we're just getting some questions about best opinion on pellets. Which pellets would you recommend?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
Sam,
we're skipping ahead.
we're skipping ahead. We will get to that.
We will get to
Sam
that,
knows
yeah.
the ins and outs of most of the pellets in the country, so
Yeah.
we'll be able to give some recommendations.
Yeah, let me get the basics out first so you understand why I recommend certain things when we get to the other end. So minerals are the sort of next big ingredient. You need these. These are all basic functions: bone formation, metabolism, enzymes, things like calcium, phosphorus, chlorine, copper, iodine, selenium. Those are essential. There's a bunch of different ways to get it. Most foods, most grains have these. Some areas, depending on where you live, it's especially the micros are very difficult
so
to
like
get in high amounts.
especially in New Zealand, we have soils that are fairly low in a whole bunch of micro minerals, which is actually quite problematic, not just to chickens, but to a lot of other birds.
Well, humans too. We have to.
Humans.
We've got to like. A lot of the bread is there's a lot of supplementation of these micro minerals and macro minerals in our own diets because of that.
Yeah, so we just have to remember this.
Yeah, so this is where people, we'll get to it, but where like grains can become problematic is that they're not perfectly designed with everything in it.
Whole diet, not a complete whole diet.
Yeah, they're not, but they have advantages and they have some great benefits.
They do have some places.
Yeah, but we'll get to that. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about is vitamins. So organic compounds these are required in small quantities, but they are essential. Like there's no getting away from needing these. Like they are the gears that make a lot of these things work. How protein is put together, there's a lot of B vitamins in that. You know, how your immune system functions, there's a lot of fat solubles in there. How your thyroid functions, you know, there's a whole bunch. So the fat solubles, your A, D, E, and K, those are stored in fat and fatty areas like your liver and things like that. Those are really good at, our body is great at storing those, which is why we don't need very much all the time. You just need a little bit. It's the C's and B's that are water soluble, and those aren't stored they're stored, but not to the same extent. And they tend to get flushed through the system pretty easily. So anybody who's taken like a Baraka or some of those like high vitamin drinks, and you notice it pretty much the next time you go to the bathroom, you're peeing it all out, bright yellow or orange. And those are all just B vitamins. Okay, so poultry can produce vitamin C, but it tends to be supplemented regardless. And it can be quite helpful with stress, especially heat stress. So it is something I would use on those hot days, especially down the South Island and stuff like that. You know, they get up to your 30, 32, and the bird just does not want to drink, does not want to eat. Those type of heat stresses are difficult. And vitamin C can help you get through those hard times there.
Yeah, so multivitamins, like the one we've got up here, the Multivite Plus, we actually import this one from Australia. I quite like it because I get quite fanatical when I bring in products. I like to look at what's in them and what I'm getting value for money. As most people will understand and know that the monopoly on bird products in New Zealand is quite tight, and I think that the pricing is pretty heavy. So that's why we kind of brought these things in. But again, multivitamins, they don't need to be expensive. Like there are hacks to these things, and also they don't need to be used daily. Like they're not.
We'll get into that too.
Yeah, we will get into that. Like, but they're good to have around.
They're good to have around.
Definitely have a place, even when using a formulated pellet.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, they have a place. But they're not all the products are built the same either. So it's important to have a look at what those look like, because there can be some missing, some that you don't really need. It's good to get one that has as many as you can, just so you know you're covered, but they're not all created equal. So you want stuff that's a bit more sort of bird focused. There might be some other people waiting too, I think. We just bear with us 1 sec. We're just going to make sure we get everybody in who wants to be here. Here we go. All right. Yep. And it's important to know that for with vitamins, that in most of the commercial pellets, minerals and vitamins are added into the levels kind of researched for chooks. Okay, so most of the guys that do, or gals that do the feed milling, take that research into consideration when they're building these things, and they'll add it in to make that minimum requirement. They're expensive, so they don't tend to add extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just want to meet the margins.
Yeah.
But as we said, like they're highly researched in terms of like the nutritional, like how the nutritional plane is.
Yeah,
it's a science.
It's a science. It's people who just
people not just whacking this stuff together like a pellet is a very scientifically like researched.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort.
Probably more so than any of our food.
Yeah. But the fact that they're putting in at a minimum means that you may not always have the right amount of vitamins available, which is why the supplement can be helpful, right? So if a chicken isn't eating, it's not getting those in there. So sometimes we have to have little tricks to get those in for them. Any good questions before I get into this? Because this is
ground linseed added to diet as a supplement. What are your opinions?
So when you're formulating your own diet, this is kind of where this graph has got to kind of come into its own, okay? So how a normal feed mill operates is that they get a whole bunch of ingredients. There's prices on the open market. They're called commodities, and the prices fluctuate. But with each of those commodities, there's sort of a range of what they include. And this is what sort of some of these guys look at when they start looking at formulating a feed. So they'll buy in corn and wheat and soy and all these things, and they'll look at all the sort of vitamins and protein and energy into these, and then they kind of make a recipe, grind it together, and put it into the pellet so that it has the basic requirements needed for the chicken. Okay, and so that's where a lot of these things like supplements and stuff come from, is that they over time look for ingredients that perhaps humans can't digest or don't eat, and then add them into these pellets to kind of get that mixture right. Fiber, oils, all these things, and they're always looking to improve it. I've never met a nutritionist that I haven't that doesn't have a real business mind to it. They're always looking for cost benefit, and they're for the most part they're looking to optimize the health for the sort of lowest cost. Okay, so yeah, that means there's a bit of play in terms of what the bird needs, and we have to be careful with that. But that's been improving since about 1930s, I think, is the first sort of official, nutritional sort of research started coming out. Maybe even earlier. I know they had shows like in the 1915s and stuff for a lot of these poultry things, especially in the US. So like things like linseed, we can go into ingredients, but there's always pros and cons to them. But things like linseed, they have a really high sort of fat content to them. They're great and they're known for that. They also have a great fiber component, but there's also some anti-nutritional stuff in linseed. So again, it's about a balance of it. I wouldn't suggest that feeding it on its own is or a great proportion of what you should be feeding a bird, but as a complement to a much more sort of holistically balanced diet, I don't think it's a problem, or if it's a treat. And we'll get into a couple of the basic rules just after this. But this graph, this is where sort of the money meets the road for you guys. Okay, so if I stole this off of one of the extension programs in Alabama. It's probably the most simplified version of what to feed a bird that I could find. And it just breaks it down into your three categories, right? So you could consider broilers like your meat producing birds. So these are your, the big white ones you'd see from Teagle or Ingham's and stuff like that. These guys are kind of built to grow for meat.
Really quickly.
Yep. Pullets are your young sort of laying birds, the ones that are little and going to be grown up to produce eggs, and then you have birds who are in lay or starting to lay eggs. Okay, and each of those have different sort of phases of their life, right? So the nutrition that a 1 week old bird gets versus a 20-week-old bird is going to be different in these sort of production models with these birds. Okay, so a starter, a grower, a finisher, those, all that means is the ration that they're starting on, the ration that they're growing on, and then the ration that you're finishing them off to produce meat. Okay, you can't get away from some of these terminologies, but it's good to understand it. And then you can have things like pellets, or a crumble, which is just a ground up pellet, or a mash, which is just the food without being formed.
This is actually quite relevant to Kimmy's question about how she gets her bantams to eat a good pellet. I mean, the thing is, like, and I know a lot of people do struggle with getting their bantams to eat pellets.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes the size is a bit of an issue for them. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a pellet. You can feed them a crumble. Like, it's just because it's got chick crumble on the packet doesn't actually mean anything. Like, most of the chicken sort of, I guess, the references on the bagging, like, they do apply muchly to the industry. So when it comes to a thing like a bantam, a full age bantam, like, these charts are really helpful because you can understand what sort of protein levels you're kind of looking for at a fully, like, aged bird. And then you're taking something like a crumble, and if you just need to drop the protein down a little bit, essentially you're just dropping down your portion size. So you can just adjust your portion size. Sam and I don't really agree so much with, like, ad lib diets in the first place. So just giving free range to your birds and letting them eat whatever they want is not the most fantastic thing to do in the first place. So allowing your birds to have something like a crumble that's, like, advertised, I guess, at chicks for something that, like, maybe is, a little bit older, it's not going
to ruin them.
It's not going to ruin them as long as you keep the portion size right to these.
But you can see there's a trend here. So the younger the bird, they need a higher plane of protein because they're building muscle. They're building, the calcium tends to be a little bit higher too because they're building bones and stuff like that. So your energy levels tends to be a little bit lower because you want them to consume a few more pellets to get all those nutrients, like the vitamins and the minerals. So because they need those in kind of a bit of a higher proportion as well. But these are just guidelines. So you can take these and sort of look at the labels that you see in the stores, and you can say, okay, I have a pullet. So let's say we've got some Wyandottes that are 10 weeks old. I'm looking at a grower feed for them because they're still developing their skeleton. They haven't started the reproductive development yet. And they're looking to sort of establish a lot of organ development and stuff. You don't need a super high protein because they're not really in production, and you're not having them to maybe some of the dual breeds will have a bit more protein, but they don't need as high as, like, one of those Lamborghini ones that you see from Teagle or some of these really sort of production ones. But they need a little bit more in terms of the lysine. They might need a little bit more in terms of methionine just because they're in a feather development stage or they've just gone through their first molt.
I mean, we've got here, wouldn't a lower portion size mean less of the other nutrients? Like, when we say lesser portion size, like, you're talking a very small amount, and while, like, small amounts are significant, like, again, this is where, like, your vitamins actually do come in quite handy. If you are having to use, like, a crumble to give an adult bird, then, like, maybe supplementing vitamins a little bit more frequently is something you just have to think about doing.
The reason why a lot of the rations that you find in shops are suggested to feed ad lib is because of that. The vitamins and the minerals are so expensive that they can't put them at the level kind of required. They have to put them at the minimum level, because they're required to put them in there. So they put them at the minimum level, and they just say, well, the chick just has to eat more of that. To do that, they actually drop the energy out of it. Energy is the most expensive part of that ration. So by dropping the energy, the bird will continue to eat to meet their energy demands. That was, like, the number one lesson right at the beginning. And by doing that, the nutritionist is hoping that they're going to pick up a lot of those vitamins and nutrients by eating more pellets. It's actually quite a savvy little business model, right? You know, you have them eat ad lib. The cost of feed is quite low, and you get repeat customers because you're going through it pretty quick. But you can, they're not all like that, but you can go have a look and just see, okay, how old is my bird? What do they need? One of the important ones to look at on this graph is the calcium down at the bottom for those in-laying hens, especially the older birds that are, 60, 40 plus weeks old, so almost a year old plus, or have been laying eggs for, a good 6 months at least. Calcium can get up quite high. Like, I haven't really seen a ration that's 4.5% calcium, but that doesn't mean they don't need it. Okay, so.
But those are signs that you can look out for, which we will go over.
Which we will go to.
Another question we've just got here is, what would you feed girls that may not start laying until spring, but will be aged 25 or so weeks by now?
Yeah, so if you're not laying, you're in what's called the grower phase. So if you're looking at this graph here, you're looking at the 17 to 18 weeks. Those weeks are based on sort of their body size and development. Doesn't matter what season they're in, if they're still sort of growing to that point and they haven't reached the egg laying point of lay, POL.
We have to remember also, like, we're in winter time as well, and like energy gets burned pretty significantly to keep warm. Like birds will just, like, my example is actually with cockatiels, their food doubles during the winter time because they need that energy to keep them warm. So chickens are the same. Like, if you live in a cold climate part of the country, then just be wary. They might need a little bit more.
But this is why I haven't included like grams, like how many grams per bird per day type thing. There are some baselines that you can use, but it depends on age, health, egg production, or what the production of that bird is, what you hope to get out of that bird, how cold it is, like all those things play into effect. What I'm trying to illustrate with this is that it just changes over time and what to look for on your package. What I don't really like, I hope nobody looks at this and says, I actually need 8% calcium, and I do that. I'm going to get into calcium because it's a bit of a bugaboo. But I'm not only am I going to feed them this ration that has extra calcium because they're older and they have thinner shells and stuff, and I need to get as much calcium in them, but I'm going to mix it into their food. I'm going to add, oyster shells. I'm going to feed it back to them. Like,
put it in their water source.
Put it in their water source. Some people go a little bit crazy with calcium.
Thin shells doesn't always mean you're deficient in calcium.
No, it's a natural part of the egg getting bigger. Like, they only have a certain amount of time in the oviduct to put an eggshell on there, so it can thin out. Do we want to see if there's anybody left in the waiting room?
Yep, this will be our last one.
Yeah. Sorry, give us 2 seconds, guys. Cool. All right. You may note I at the bottom doesn't include scratch feed. So scratch feed is your typical what you would imagine somebody in the Middle Ages would be doing with their chickens, which is what happened. Like, they would grow grain, they would throw out the parts of the grains that they couldn't use or that were not wholesome to turn into bread, and the chickens and pigs would utilize it for their own growth. It's how it all sort of started. It's
high energy.
These guys were farming these animals who produced a protein source for them, and they ate stuff that the humans couldn't eat. It was like a win-win situation for them. But a scratch feed is basically cracked grains. You can see.
And we do get the versions now where they mix the scratch feed in with the pellets as well, which we're also not great fans of.
Well, there's pros and cons, but yeah. So it's what you need to realize is that feeding grains isn't a complete diet. All right, the grains, you don't know what the nutrient profile of these grains are. They may be cheap, you may get a lot of it, but it may not have any iodine in it at all, or very low levels.
If it's come from New Zealand, it's probably not going to have much selenium.
The energy and the protein values can be all over the place. wheat can be as low as 8-9% protein if it's stored wrong.
Mm.
So if you're expecting the bird to grow or produce eggs, like that protein isn't coming out of thin air, it's what you're feeding it. So.
Another, like, what this really creates, and the reason we don't really love this as like a food type for chickens, is because it does create this like competition between birds.
Yeah.
So because grains, like cracked grains by themselves, are super high energy, and
Corn,
a lot of the time
energy,
super high fat as well. Like those are the pieces of food that the chickens actually really want. So you'll find that there'll be a competition between the top of the pecking order to take out the grains, the scratch grain, which means that all the little ones at the bottom of the order will end up with the pellety bits, which is actually good for them. But like you'll find that then your birds that are sitting on the top of the pecking order end up getting quite sick or malnourished.
Yeah.
And it is because they are the top of the pecking order and they're getting all the what they consider the good stuff.
But actually
not so good for keeping them.
They don't know it doesn't have enough selenium.
Yeah,
or doesn't have
not so
iodine.
good for keeping them in tip-top order.
And so you end up with birds that are like either highly over-conditioned, they get fatty liver, or like a foie gras type liver.
Or they lack calcium.
Or they don't get enough calcium. They can't
because the
shell their
calcium's
eggs.
in the pellets.
Yeah. Well, the calcium's in the pellets, but it'll be really low in some of those grains. Like, it's pretty low on wheat and stuff. But that's where the selective feeding comes from. So this photo that we have up, it has a range of them. And I bet everyone on here can pick what their chooks would eat first out of all that. Birds are not silly. They know these things, and they have taste buds. They have like 300 taste buds. They use them all.
It's enough.
It's enough to kind of distinguish all these things. And their eyesight is unbelievable. So they can pick out a portion of a cracked pea out of there, no problem whatsoever. So you get a selective feeding. So you're hoping that they get the nutrients, but by doing this, you just don't know.
It's just like when you've got like a bag of candy and like there's always those people yourself who doesn't like the orange or the lemon ones, and then just by the end of the week, probably the end of the day, you end up with the orange and the lemon ones left over in the bag. It's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's no good calcium or nutrients in those either.
In any of them.
In any of those. All right. So this is like, if you're going to take anything away today, this is the stuff that you need to take. Okay.
This is one we see quite a lot of, and that causes a lot of issues.
Not just for backyard people, but for farmers and stuff too. This is like the quintessential, how do I keep my flock healthy? The key to managing the health of your flock is feed distribution. Okay. While they work together and live together, and
they are little dinosaurs.
They are dinosaurs. And if I'm not getting what I need to survive, I take it from somebody else. Right. And because if I'm top bird in the pecking order, I'm also going to take what I want. And the rest of you're great to hang out with, but they are cutthroat. They are cutthroat. So one of the things it's not even recommended. This is an essential point. Every bird should have enough space to access the food without competition. All right. If you have one pile of food and you have one bird who's the dominant bird, they will eat their fill first. They will keep the rest of the birds at bay until they've, like, on pain of death.
And it may not look obvious to you when you're kind of watching them feed as well, because you'll be like, oh, but they're all standing around doing like pecking at the ground, like eating from that bowl. But actually, if you monitor them closely, you will find that there is one that is actually being quite aggressive in a very chicken way and taking all the food, and the other ones are just kind of like waiting. So they'll kind of like hover around. They'll put their face close to the food and they'll be
peck the ground next to it.
Yeah, they'll just be kind of waiting because they do have like a bit of an agreement with each other as to who gets first dibs, and it's not in their best interest to try to steal from the top hen if she's decided that that's what she's getting. So and a lot of people don't watch those really like nuanced like bird behaviors, and they are there. So that's why we're always just like spread it out. That's why we're kind of not mad fans of like your general feeders that I mean,
They're okay. They
They're
serve a
good. Like,
purpose.
yeah, they serve a purpose. Like, it's not like there's a better or a worse one, but what you need is more of them. Like,
Yeah. Sometimes they each, like, you need space where one of them can't rule the roost, really.
Yeah.
So this is where, like, the point feeders, the pro is that you don't have to feed them that often. You can put it all in one spot. You know, they can be sparrow proof and light and rat proof and things like that. The con is it's usually one or two birds that do most of the feeding, and they don't tend to dwell too far from it either. And you may even notice that they chase off the other birds from there. The thing that you want to look for to make sure that your birds are getting the food that they need, and I recommend this to everybody that will listen, is that you need to be able to pick up your bird, have a feel of their body condition. We'll go into body condition another time, but you're checking to see how big they're growing, their fat pad, which is just on the back end. But you're also checking to see how big that crop is. And is that crop the same on every bird? Okay, so after all the food's gone, every so often you should be going in, picking up the birds and checking that crop on all of them if you can, or a good selection so you know how evenly distributed that food is. If you have one that's like really small or nothing, and you have ones that are gigantic, like a softball, or, you know, like really big, like a huge handful, you know the food is not really being distributed evenly. Okay. And at that point, you've got to start thinking, well, how do I get the food distributed evenly? Okay. And that can be a variety of ways. You can spread it out with time. You can spread it out in how much area you cover.
People don't really quite understand, like, chickens don't need to have access to food all the time. Like, I mean, especially these commercial, like, breeds, like shavers and highlines, they are so used to getting fed timely in a day, like the morning and the night. So, like, they're quite happy getting a portion in the morning, just filling up on that, and then getting a portion at nighttime. Or even if you don't have time to do like 2 times feeding, like once a day, like just spread it out in the morning and then let them go for gold, like free ranging for the rest of the day. Like, they're quite happy with that as long as they get the amount that they're allotted for the day.
And by watching and picking them up and having a look at their condition over time, you're going to pick out the ones that are a little bit more higher on the pecking order, and the ones that aren't. And it's a game you have to play. Their behavior is such that you have to really monitor that, or because you will end up with the ones on the tail end not faring too well, and the ones on the other end running into some other issues that you weren't quite sure.
So we got a question here. Will non-laying birds have smaller crops at the end of the day than layers?
Yeah, if everything else is equal and one bird is getting 30, and like it can be as bad as 30%, 25% of what they need in a day. Like, they will be going downhill or looking for other things to eat. You know, this is where they start getting destructive with other birds. They will pick dead things. They will pick the feathers off the other birds. They will eat dirt. We've seen birds just pack up on, like,
this is actually
bark and wood.
Yeah, this is actually quite an interesting one. Like, when you're looking at the shavers, and the shavers are the really obvious ones. You always see the sad commercials of the shavers, the balding, needing rehoming, poor shavers. And I kind of always wondered, why are they so naked? And I only just like kind of found out recently, and I was like, oh, they're naked not because they're molting, they're naked because they're eating each other's feathers generally.
Well, at the end of the run, they're molting, yes. But if they're losing feathers and they're throwing 30, 40 weeks old, there's something wrong with how the food is being given. Either there's a deficiency in the feed, or the distribution is really poor. And on the place that we went to, the distribution was really poor. And if you all of a sudden have an issue with something in the feed, it just makes it worse.
Yeah, because like eating feathers is like protein. Like it takes protein to make feathers, and they gain protein from eating feathers.
Yeah, it's methionine and lysine in feathers, and that's the one that they need the most. So they pull it off the other one. I'm fully convinced in my time, I'm up to, I think, 11, 12 years now, that cannibalism isn't necessarily inherent in a farming system. Even a cage, those ones where they have cage and the people say, oh, well, they peck each other in there. Yes, they're bored. There's other behavior things. I agree. But one of the big issues is that I don't think we ever had the feed quite right for these birds, or the distribution of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Does the crop empty during during the day or just overnight? I mean, the crop is always emptying. That's just kind of.
It's designed to store food.
Yeah.
And it's actually under a semi-conscious control. So if they get into a pattern where they aren't getting feed or only getting fed once a day, they can hold on to that food for a little bit in there, and it can take a little while. A lot of people like to think that it takes about 7 hours or so. If they have ad-lib food, that's about right. It takes about, on average, about 7 hours for a crop to go from completely full to empty. But if they know they're not going to get fed, or they know there's food is scarce, that can go out to like 9, 10, 12, 14 hours.
Yeah. Or if you have like sickness as well, like the crop tends to slow down.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. Well, it's so the emptying of the crop is just like the sort of passage of food through the gut. It's under nervous control. So if you have anything that's causing illness or pain, that stuff all just slows down. Any more questions?
Molasses and feed, is it good?
So again, it depends on how much and the quality of your molasses. None of these things are harmful if it's well balanced. Okay, and that's the great thing with poultry nutrition, is that there's a whole range of different things you can feed. I wouldn't just rely on one thing. I would just make sure, what I'm trying to discuss is that you need to really consider a balanced approach to how you're feeding them. Okay, and the easiest way to do that is with a commercial pellet. It really is. It's the cheapest and easiest. I know people can find grain that's really cheap and stuff, but it doesn't have the same sort of nutrient density. It doesn't have the same sort of consistency as you would find in a commercial pellet. Okay, it's not to say that those other ones are bad, but you've got to realize what the risks are.
I think there is just a bit of a stigma to commercial pellets, like you are kind of skimping out on your chicken, or like
everybody thinks that.
Yeah, I'm not sure why people think that. It's just like these scratch feeds and things, like they feel more luxurious, and I think that is a lot of branding.
A lot of branding, but a lot of it, like, okay, you're gonna get my soapbox out a little bit here, but but like the industries, they come from a long history of how they've done things and why they've done things. And there's a bit of a marketing thing that says some of these guys skip a lot on cost trying to save money, and they do. That's, like farmers notoriously always looking at the bottom line. I get it, but saying that, there is still a lot of benefit from the research and from the baseline.
They still need to produce healthy birds. They still need to produce good eggs, good meat.
Yeah.
So like they're not going to be skimping out where those things are going to be affected.
You can't outsmart biology. Like you can't. A healthy bird is a productive bird. And if you skimp out on feed, if you try to be cheeky or smart and you think you get away with something, it's never happened. I've never seen that happen. Like people who think they can outsmart a bird by feeding it sawdust or looking at the cheapest quality ingredients they can find, every time they've done that, something has gone wrong. I don't think they do that, but you know what I mean.
Not.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No, I think we got it.
No, wait, hang on. Are Opertons prone to overeating, or do they just eat a lot? Okay. Okay, heritage breeds. Sorry, I'm going to get on screen here. Heritage breeds and production genetic breeds are like the two polar opposite ends of the spectrum. But all the sort of production animals, production birds, they all come from the heritage ones. So all the traits that you see in these, the ability to put on a lot of weight or the ability to produce a lot of eggs, all come from these heritage breeds at some point, way back when. Everybody's seen those pictures of the broiler from the 1950s to now. Like that's just genetic selection. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just somebody picking the biggest bird who grew on the less amount of feed or produced the right amount of eggs. But they all have a tendency to be Labradors. They're like chickens. I haven't met a chicken yet that isn't really food motivated. So much so that you can train them. If you get them hungry enough, you can train them to do almost anything. Respond to clickers, respond to bells, voice commands, really complex behaviors. you can train them to do that. And it's because they're very food motivated.
Again, dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs, their eyes, both of their eyes outweigh their brain. So if you took, well, they're about 2/3 of their brain. So if you took the volume of their eyes, their brain is only slightly bigger than both of their eyeballs put together. So it means they're visually very sort of driven to find and look for food. So yes, Orpingtons, heritage breeds, there are tendencies on a lot of those genetic lines to overconsume.
Yeah, my hens are picky and don't like pellets. Okay,
Yeah.
so we get
Yeah.
we get this one an awful lot.
Yep.
They will eat pellets. I've never met a chicken, and I've been told this many times from many people, like, my chicken doesn't eat pellets.
Yeah.
They come into my care. Chickens will eat pellets. You just have to find either the right one or take back the food a little bit to, like, you know, entice them on to pellets, because generally if you're just giving them pellets but you're giving them all the other fancy stuff as well, they're not dumb. They're going to be like,
if I get bolognese
every night and I know that I get it, they're not going to eat the pellet. Like, you kind of have to, like, you have to train them onto eating the pellets. It's just something you have to do.
Yeah.
And it's whether you're finding the right thing or, like, starting to withdraw the tasty treats and, like, giving more just pellets. Like, it's just kind of what you have to do. Like, eventually they'll be like, okay, that's the only option. I guess I'll have to eat it.
Sometimes too, like, birds are very strange with new things. They don't like new tastes. They don't like new objects. And so anytime you introduce something new, it's a big deal for a bird. I don't care what species of bird it is, they flip out.
We've got a question about transition. Never transition quickly on any bird for anything. Like, birds.
That was going to be my point.
Birds don't actually like change.
Yeah. If you were to take all the bolognese that they're getting or all the food scraps they're getting and put out a bowl of pellets, your birds will starve to death.
Yeah.
They just don't like that sort of stuff.
They'll just be waiting for the bolognese to come out.
They'll be like, you put out all these little brown rocks. I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, it's just a case of moving slowly and doing a transition across, essentially. I mean, like, whenever we're doing any conversion onto any food, we're always quite wary about how we're doing it.
Yes.
I mean, the one thing you should always do is, if you are going to make significant changes to a diet, go slow, monitor. By monitoring, I mean watch what's coming out the other end. Like,
poops don't lie.
They do not lie. So always, like, keep an eye on those. If they all of a sudden start going small or not very often or, like, green,
worst case,
bring it back.
Weight. Yeah,
bring it back. You don't want to start again.
Start again. Come up with a new tactic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Supplements. God, I love supplements.
Wait, I've got a really great question here. My chickens love dead mice.
Yeah. From
the mouse trap. Is that all right giving it to them?
Well, as long as it's like a kill trap and it's not a poison trap or a glue trap, those are no, I'd say no 100% of the time. Chickens are opportunistic.
Mice can carry some bad stuff.
Yep.
I think you just have to be wary about that.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're like, are you going to stop them though? Like,
no.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So I would rather have you trapping rats and mice, because the less of them you have around your chickens, the probably healthier your eggs and chickens will be. But eating them, like, we had that one that ate the huntsman in front of you. Like, they're prone to finding things and eating them. So
I love it.
Bear that in mind. We'll cover health stuff in another episode, that's for sure. All right.
Supplements.
Okay, back onto my soapbox. Calcium. Calcium is tightly controlled with hormones. You can't change calcium usage or calcium need in a bird quickly. If they are all of a sudden hypocalcemic because they're a poor diet or something's happened, okay, giving them a bowl of oyster shells or shells like we see here is not going to fix them in a day, okay? It will help, but it's not going to fix them in a day. The hormone is so tightly regulated because it's so important to so many systems that it's almost impossible to change quickly. Even with injections, even with the water supplements, it oftentimes, like a bird that has what's called layer fatigue, can take weeks to get those tissues back to normal calcium levels, okay? So, and you can get hypocalcemia from either giving too much or too little. It's on both ends, okay? It's really a really fine sort of boundary. And most commercial pellets have enough calcium for birds in high production. So if you're having issues with calcium and you are feeding a decent commercial pellet for a majority of what they're eating, and you have some free choice calcium on the side, and you still have a calcium problem, there is probably something seriously wrong with either the health of the bird or the food that's going in. Okay.
Never mix your calcium. Like if you've got something like oyster grit here, don't mix it in with your pellets.
Yeah, don't
like always have it on the side. Always.
Yeah, because by forcing them to eat too much, you can push them into well, there's hypercalcemia, so you can go into like a toxicity, but you can actually over time, even if it's a little bit too much over time, reduce the available calcium they have in their body. So they will, because they're taking so much in, they'll be activating a whole bunch out of their bones to put on eggshells. You'll get that dimpling thing. It'll keep happening for a long period of time, and slowly their body just slowly shuts down. It affects the contractions of their muscles, their heart. Okay. And yeah, so toxicity, toxicity happens even if like the levels that you need that are harmful are just slightly above the required level. So that 4.8 that I saw on the graph, or that I showed you on the graph, that's like at the upper end. I'd be really kind of, oh, wow, that's a pretty intense feed with that much calcium. And then if you're supplementing on the side or forcing it in with the water and stuff, you can really push those issues going the other way too. You can get, excess dietary calcium leads to minimum absorption of calcium and other minerals. And then your serum, your calcium serum goes up, and then that just pulls it out of their bones, and they don't put enough back on. So you end up with that layer fatigue or osteoporosis. Okay. And then if you have too much calcium, that calcium that's in their serum ends up trying to come out of the body, especially if they're not producing eggs, which is what people do. And like, oh, my chick isn't producing eggs, or it's got shellless eggs. So they give that extra calcium. But what happens there is the calcium ends up like just accumulating in the kidneys, and you end up with kidney problems and stuff too. Or you get mineralization. I've seen mineralization in the skin, around the eyes and stuff. And it can be quite, it's odd and painful. All right, so, and deficiency is caused by a bunch of different things, all right? So either the diet is poor, or you've given too much phosphorus. So that too much phosphorus is like an all meat diet. Okay, there's barely any calcium in muscle. There's just enough for it to contract and for nerve function. So if you're feeding a lot of sort of like dog roll or steak or really high protein, thinking that's what your broiler is going to sort of need to kind of grow, you'll push it into what's called rickets, phosphorus or phosphorus, high phosphorus rickets. The bone just doesn't want to develop. You need a ratio of calcium to phosphorus. And then inadequate vitamin D. Vitamin D is often supplemented in a feed, but they also get it by getting sun on their eyes and skin, okay? And this is where all seed diets are really difficult. Their seeds and grains are usually high in phosphorus and low in calcium.
Yeah, we've got a question here about the Top Flight Scratch and Lay, not the right thing.
We don't talk brands.
We don't really talk brands.
We have a lot of friends and people that work in a lot of these industries, and it's a lot of it, again, the food is good. You just have to be aware
of what you're feeding,
of why and what can happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So I
wouldn't, just don't make it as your sole diet, or actually just be really wary. Like if you are feeding it, like making sure that there isn't just a top hen taking out all good stuff.
Yeah,
and that's all
or taking all the corn and taking all the
because if that is the case, then I would probably just change it.
Yeah. The reason why farmers went to pellets and stuff too wasn't just because of the nutrient availability is very similar in each pellet. So every mouthful has the same sort of requirements. Yeah. It's also easier to feed a bunch of chooks that are kind of geared towards looking for the stuff that they want. When it all looks the same, they all just pick whatever's there. They actually look for pellet size and stuff that's useful for them, but it does make it easier when it's kind of all the same thing. You don't get like, oh, here's a bright tomato when they pick that out. Okay, so chronic egg laying is another important cause of deplete calcium. And you see this in a lot of the rescue birds. At the end, they withdraw a lot of feed because the birds are coming out of production, and you can see a lot of them going into hypocalcemia, and they get really weak and stuff. And that's where like rescues, they're molting, they look a little weak because they've been reducing their feed and stuff. That they look horrible at that point. And all that is really, a lot of it is just that. All of a sudden, if you start feeding them well, keeping them warm, giving them the tools to be able to regrow those feathers, they bounce back and they do really well, or they can do really well. The problem with a lot of them though is the long-term sort of livability.
Yeah, and like that's actually really like good thing to mention. Like if you are going to have like rescue chickens, remember that like they do come from a really, like, they've grown up with like a fairly strict regime of food. So like they're actually, like, again, they're the Lamborghinis of the chicken world. Like don't mess around with their diet too hard. Like they do quite like just a nice solid pellet.
Yeah, well, it's what they're used to. So like we were talking about the bantams, like birds not wanting to transition onto pellets. It can be the other way for a lot of these guys too. It can take them a while to get used to the other foods.
And it's cool to give them other foods, but like their bodies don't do fantastically well with throwing a lot of extra stuff on them.
Yeah, the shavers and highlines aren't supposed to have a lot of fat. After production, like when they sort of get rescued and stuff, they can bounce the other way, where people just say, man, they're hungry, they ate everything, and they keep giving them everything.
Yeah, well, they just feel bad for them. So they think, like, poor babies, I'm just going to give them everything that they want.
And they will eat it.
You're actually killing them with kindness. And, like, we will probably get into that subject, like, another time. But, those are still birds that you have to treat a really specific way if you want to get the longevity out of them. Otherwise, you do push them into some pretty gnarly situations where their lifespan will just deplete quite quickly.
Yeah.
Feeding is just dangerous.
I think it's worthwhile just that they're already sort of taxed. They breed these guys to produce a lot of eggs early on in their life. They're not bred to continue to produce eggs over 10 years. That's how the selection was done. They get all the ovulations done in under 2 years. And then there's still a few sort of ovulations to come, like there'll probably be another 100 or so after that. But the oviduct and the metabolism can be like worn out. And the risk is, especially if you overfeed a bird, is that now a bird that's used to or wanting to produce a lot of eggs, you're giving them a whole bunch of extra food, a whole bunch of extra energy. It's almost forcing them to continue to produce more eggs, where they really should be going the other way. They should be relaxing and not producing as many eggs at this stage. It's just too much. And everybody knows, like, the two things that are going to kill shavers and highlines are probably egg peritonitis or some sort of ovarian tumor. And that's the reason why we want to keep their production down low.
To a minimum.
Yeah, they're not egg machines. They're not egg machines.
Yeah. My girls love peanuts and bread.
Yeah, me too.
So we all.
Yeah, I love peanuts and bread.
Peanuts are high in fat.
They are.
Bread is carbohydrate.
Yes.
I mean, okay as a treat.
Yeah, so.
Keep it small.
Yeah. Treats are good. Treats are fun. Dogs love treats. Cat love treats. I love treats.
Especially when you're creating like that sort of relationship with your bird as well. Like treats are valuable for that, creating that.
Yeah.
That trust.
You'll see, we see it with a lot of budgie owners or small parrot owners, and they put in this giant bowl of food that's like 10 times the weight of the bird, and they'll get that in a day. Like I can only imagine what I would do with that much food.
Do we recommend the hormone implant and X layers?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But keeping them lean is
just as good.
Just as good, to be honest. Keeping them lean, great. Putting the implant in, it's not 100% foolproof, but it does help. I mean, but like if you're gonna do that, you might as well keep them lean as well.
You're gonna have to, because you can blow through implants. You can. They are geared, like they will select to produce eggs over their own health, their own immune system. So even birds like these shavers and highlines, even when they're sick, they will continue to try and produce eggs to their detriment.
which is not good.
Which
so
is not
eggs
good.
Before life.
Yeah, yeah. So we got to make choices for them. You can't always let them
Yeah.
decide. All right, next one.
Mealworms, dried, good for molting. Mealworms are not my favorite insect to use for birds, but I mean, great
Treats?
treat.
High fat.
Super high fat. If you want a nice protein insect for your birds, I would stick to grasshoppers or crickets.
Yep, something with the shell. The chitin is good, and they have a lot of muscle in the chitin.
Well, you've got soldier fly.
Soldier fly larvae are good.
They're great.
We do
and a great composting system too.
Yeah.
2 for 1.
Yeah, well, soldier flies, they have a cool hormone that keeps other flies away from the compost.
Yeah, so
There
awesome.
you go. So you don't
Water
get all those
acidification. This is one of our favorite ones because everyone's this seems to be a very controversial conversation.
Which I don't understand. The science for water acidification has been around for eons. This is pretty much fermentation science, okay, guys?
Yeah. So we're not talking about like water acidification, what's commonly used as apple cider vinegar, as like any kind of wormer or anything crazy like that. We're just talking about like changing the pH balance of our water, which in turn will like help out the chicken's crop. And
yeah. So what it does, so bacteria lives under certain conditions, okay? And when you drop the acid, the pH level down to a bit more acidic, you change which bacteria can live there because some bacteria can live in acidic environments. And it just so happens that there's a lot of good bacteria that can live at the 3 to 6 pH range. We eat a lot of them, sauerkraut, I love kimchi, those type of things. And those are all low sort of acidic foods. That's how kombucha is made. A lot of those fermentations push that pH lower because we're selecting for certain bacteria. All we're doing in this, and I use this for a lot of farms. So a lot of free range farms.
This is used commercially.
Yeah, like in big numbers. We use different acids. So apple cider vinegar is what's called a weak organic acid. And you need a fair bit of it to change your pH. But can you grab my pH strips? It's right there. Yep.
You can.
So I use just a pool strip, and on the back, you have like a little pH range up there, and all you're doing is mixing it until you get to about a 4 to 6.
Yeah, I think we kind of generally work out it's around 5 mils of apple cider vinegar to a liter of water is what I generally say if you're not using a test strip.
Yep, but it depends on your water source. Yeah. Some water can have a really high pH with really alkali water.
Some vinegar can have
because some vinegar can have a lot of acetic acid in there too, which is what we're using to kind of lower it down. It's not the same as an antibiotic. Okay, so don't think of it at that sort of level. But what it does is you're trying to provide an environment that is more favorable to the good bacteria than the bad. Okay, and there is a lot of science in poultry specifically using this as a supplement to good nutrition to help maintain the health of the gut. If you can keep a healthy gut, you tend to have a very healthy chicken. Okay, so you avoid things like dysbacteriosis, you avoid things like a lot of salmonella issues, Campylobacter, and there's a lot of good evidence around even Clostridia, which is one of the things that causes necrotic enteritis, so after coccidiosis and stuff.
I love probiotics.
The picture still weirds me out, but all right. Probiotics. Again, we're in the infancy of science, so there's not a lot of great specificity yet, but it's coming along. And there is an overwhelming amount of documentation around the benefits of good gut microbes. The more they look at it, the more they realize how important it is. Okay, so it's still early days, which means there's a lot of variety of results depending on what you're using. But some of the benefits are good gut microbial homeostasis, so you keep a good sort of foundation. You get a really good immune response, especially in young chicks. Young chicks that are just hatching out, their guts are very naive, and introducing the right bacteria early can be quite substantially important. And then in a lot of cases, in a lot of my cases, where I've removed sort of prophylactic antibiotics from a lot of operations, we've replaced we get a lot of therapeutic use out of using this. It's one of those things that has to be used frequently, either every day or for extended periods of time after a challenge like a diarrhea challenge or dysbacteriosis.
Yeah, or like after if you have used antibiotics, it's
That's
a great thing to
time.
follow up with probiotics. Just a reminder, because like this one does get mixed up a bit. If you are, or if your bird is on an antibiotic, don't throw probiotics at it at the same time. Those things cancel each other out. So it's good to leave the probiotics to after treatments.
Yeah. It helps reestablish that homeostasis, okay?
Yeah.
Because,
So we're just asking, yogurt. Yogurt's good.
Yeah.
Yogurt's got a
5 billion colony-forming units of lactobacilli.
Stick to the stuff that's got no sugar in it.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's a great point, because some yeast can be quite bad. But saying that, so we don't understand the mechanism of action on a few of those. But there are products, some in New Zealand, that have medical or therapeutic claims with it. So they're getting there, okay? Yeah. They're getting there. And here's a very,
we will actually post this entire all these screenshots in PDF just because there's a lot of stuff here.
I saw this out of a 2020 paper.
For those of you who are quite nerdy about your probiotics.
Yeah, well, everybody asks, right? Everybody wants to know.
Yeah, because I mean, it depends on what kind of strains you're using, and birds are very specific on their strains. So just throwing any old probiotic at them is it can be a bit hit and miss, but there are specific ones that are found in specific birds, so we like to use those ones.
So I've included stuff that has been used in humans and birds. You'll see the characteristics listed there. These are just a few of them, but as you can see, lactobacilli, which are the ones found in fermentation and stuff like that, are sort of really prominent. You've got a pediococcus there near the end, again, an acid sort of environment. So this is, again, falls into the reason why we want to lower that pH in that crop. And then there's even a yeast in there that's found in a lot of fruit that just helps the system.
So we've got a question about fermented wheat and pellets. So fermentation, like, good. And like a lot of people do like soak and sprout and things like that for their birds, which is like, we're massive fans of, but just with all things like this, just make sure you're doing it correctly.
Yeah.
Like you can make them manky. Like just don't put them on the bench for too long or keep them in the fridge for too long. Like just understand what it like.
Food safety is huge.
give them a sniff. Like, and especially for soak and sprout, like you can actually use water acidification to like help them grow and
healthier and not rot. So
and
you have
not
a
rot
longer
so quick.
life.
Just understand what it means to keep them well, because they do have the ability to go rancid quite quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, I love electrolytes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one we get asked quite a lot about, especially like how to use them when you are using them, why we use them in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so electrolytes are chemicals. When they're dissolved in water, they conduct electricity, thus the name. And they regulate nerve function, muscle function, hydration, pH balance, and they help repair tissue. They're involved in a lot of functions in the body, okay? Calcium is also an electrolyte. It carries a charge to it. And then I'm back on my excessive calcium soapbox. You can get muscle fatigue, increased urine output. That's from kidney damage. Gastrointestinal pain, that's from inability to contract the muscles properly. Irregular heartbeats, because if you don't have enough calcium in a muscle, it doesn't function properly. But if you can get a lot of problems with electrolytes if you have too much electrolytes in your body or too low.
Yeah, or like my pet peeve is people just making up electrolyte recipes as well. Like you've got to be really, really careful if you find recipes on the internet of how to make this sort of stuff at home. Like it is, again, a science, and you need to get the levels so accurate. Otherwise you can like do some damage.
Excessive electrolytes. So what happens is they draw water. So if you've got a high concentration of them in the lumen of the gut, they pull water to them. And then after a time, then everything sort of balances out once they sort of get absorbed into the body. If it's too high, they pull too much water out, and then it stays out of the lumen long enough for it to go out the back end.
So you can actually do the reverse of what you're intentionally trying to do, which is not ideal.
You can do that with high glucose. You can do that with high electrolytes. It's called osmotic diarrhea. It actually has a term, and it can kill kids. It can kill pets.
Yeah. So if you are giving electrolytes and your bird does go into diarrhea, stop.
Yeah. Or just be careful with your amount. So I've got a bit of a. Okay, so causes of imbalance. These are low levels of electrolytes in the diet. This is another reason why like grains can be a little bit hit and miss. Electrolytes can be all over the place. Dehydration. So these are hot days in the summer or birds that are not drinking. Okay, prolonged vomiting, diarrhea, sometimes worms or coccidiosis can cause these side of things. A poor diet, again, scratch ration. I'm not picking on it. I'm just saying it can have that. Rancid feeds, old feed ingredients, all these things break down the nutrients in there. Okay, the longer you store the feed, even fermenting will lower a bit of the quality to it. So making sure you have it fresh and going keeps those nutrient levels high.
To be honest, like I don't often use electrolytes. The only times I've actually really used them is mainly on a critically ill patient that's been dehydrated for a substantial amount of time, or as Sam said, like a bird that's under heat stress. Like those are the two occasions that I'm like, it's a definite electrolytes thing for me. But other than that, I don't throw them around as much as other people tend to.
Yeah, ascites or congestive heart failure, you can get a thing, and kidney disease is obviously one of the big ones. They just, if your kidneys are broken, they're a filter system. They're supposed to catch all those electrolytes. So if they're not catching it, they're all just leaving, and you have to constantly, to stay healthy, you have to constantly replace them. So more is not better when it comes to electrolytes. They can be quite harmful to the bird. They can be quite harmful to the, and they can set you back if you have a critically ill patient. You can also induce a lot of problems. This is where your sort of refeed issue comes into play. Phosphorus is one of the electrolytes. If you put too much phosphorus in there, you can cause a whole bunch of issues, okay? So follow the label and go slow.
Like monitor what's coming out, like droppings. Never lie.
Yeah. If the droppings are continuing to get worse and worse, or they weren't loose before you gave the electrolytes, and then you start the electrolytes and all of a sudden they're just squirting out their back end, I would stop those.
Can you mix electrolytes with the vinegar in the water?
Yeah.
You can like there are some things you can mix together and some things that you can't mix together.
Well, water can hold so much. So when we talk about ppm, that's part per million. So you're looking at really small amounts of stuff. And once it's soluble in there, you can mix a lot of things.
My main thing is like when you're mixing stuff in the water and you try to keep it simple, because like sometimes birds know when you put too much stuff in the water and they tend to go off it a little bit, and then you tend to make them dehydrated from them just not wanting to touch the water since it's untrustworthy looking.
Yeah. If they're sick, they probably already have an imbalance in their gut. Okay, so you probably don't need to be acidifying at that point. It's probably more crucial that you're replacing a few electrolytes if they're dehydrated. And then once they get back to normal, you can get back onto the acidification part. That's usually how I would approach that one. Vitamins or electrolytes, times of heat stress, again, a great way to get through heat stress. Okay, it will actually save lives and will keep them eating and keep them hydrated. And having a functional gut is about 80% of the solve for a lot of patients. Keeping the sort of intestinal system moving and uptaking and getting rid of stuff.
Keeping them drinking. Like if your bird has gone off food, that's one thing. But if they have stopped drinking, like that is a serious thing. Like. And
again, that's where, so this is the last point here. Best treatment for electrolyte imbalance is a complete diet and making sure they're eating the diet. Like if they're not eating, then we probably have to supplement some electrolytes. Otherwise functions start going all wonky. All right, we're getting near the end. So household toxins, I thought I'd just give you, most of you guys know these ones, but moldy feed, okay? So these are some extreme examples of clumping and mold and things. Keeping them dry and warm, but not storing them for too long in poor environments is a big thing for pellets. So if you have any sort of clumping, discoloration, weird smells, so if in doubt, throw it out, or compost it or whatever it is you need to do. Okay, chocolate's just as toxic to birds as it is to dogs and cats. We seem to have lucked out as a species to be able to eat chocolate. Onions, again, thiosulfate causes red blood cells to clump. They start eating large amounts, and because they're little, they don't need heaps. Can cause a lot of issues with bleeding and stuff like that. Avocados. Persin is the toxin in avocados, and a half an avocado, just the meat on like the green part of the avocado, half of it can kill a chicken. So you'll see them have difficulty breathing, but these toxins also live in the stem and the leaves and stuff too. So just like with green potatoes and things of the nightshade, the toxins through the whole plant, not just the tuber or the fruit and stuff. Okay.
Leek, okay.
I think you're still
in the onion family.
I think you're still in the onion family.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd risk it.
I'd probably look that one up. I don't know 100%, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure that one's still in the onion family.
Yeah, I think we're almost there. I think we're at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, we're at the question part.
Questions. There was one in here that I wanted to answer because it's one of those ones. Is D okay to use? It depends on how you
want to start a fight with me? Is that what's going on?
It depends on like how you're using it, why you're using it.
Yeah.
Like if you're using it for dusting on your bird to get rid of lice or mites, or if you're using it as like something that they can eat to help with worming. We generally say no to both of those things.
Well, yeah, the uses I think are slim, and the risks can be high. There are health risks with it. Silica. A diatomaceous earth is the silica shell of a microscopic organism from the ocean. You mine it out of the ground, and there are some papers where the miners have had massive respiratory issues, and they put in some really basic sort of PPE stuff, and they were able to save a whole bunch of their lives. But it doesn't break down. It's an inert. Silica is an inert. You can't digest it, you can't get rid of it, and it's small shards, so it's microscopic bits of glass, and that's how it works to get rid of the insects or the lice and stuff. It gets on them, it punctures them. It will do the exact same thing to an unprotected cell in your body as it will the chick's body as well.
So like the way our friend used to say to us is because like, insects are very small and like these shards are very small. He's like, if you're an insect and these shards were around the place, you would be walking around them. So it makes you understand that actually to get rid of bugs, you have to coat everything with D if you really want to get them.
Yeah.
Which is problematic because it's a lot of D that you have to use all the time. And like, again, like people using it for worming, it's not a foolproof like worming method. Like there's no good evidence that suggests its use for worming. I mean,
people have been studying it for a long time.
And you would think like if it's been around on the market for decades, you'd think that someone would have come up with some science by now that suggests its use.
That it's effective.
It's effective by now, but they just haven't, which means that it's probably not.
So the in-feed stuff is 2% DE, right? So the non-food grade stuff is 100%. 2%, just means you get small lesions happening, but you got to think about how much of those things you have to put down all the time to get the bugs. I think is the biggest argument against it. And then if you add in the fact that that if it's in the air and you're breathing it in, like if you don't have a mask or an eye cover, you're getting that silicosis in your lungs. It would be
like us rolling around on pink bats.
Which is why they've stopped really using a lot of that.
And like even like for worming methods, it's like they don't really understand the mode of action for that, but having
parasites swallowing glass,
having silica running through your intestinal tract, like what it's essentially doing is like
inflammation.
It's inflammation. It's micro cuts throughout your intestinal tract, which is, yeah, worms are going to find it slightly harder to bury themselves in inflamed tissue. But do you really want to inflame the tissue in your chickens' stomachs? Like it's
and
it's just not good.
a lot of the health benefits for the food stuff they think is coming from the inflammation that it produces in there. You know, like the stuff that we have, like irritable bowel syndrome and stuff, it's an overactive immune system. So by adding the inflammation, you get just a decent baseline, sort of suppresses the issue. Listen, it can be used. Some people use it effectively. Is it something that I would recommend? There's probably better things that are less harmful.
In terms of your vet recommending it, it does get recommended a lot.
Yeah.
But it really just, it comes down to whether they've actually done enough research or reading about it, or actually.
Sometimes. Some of them actually really like it.
Some of them actually just like it.
Yeah.
Do reading for yourself. Like seriously, like if you're actually questioning it, like the information is on the internet.
Yeah.
Like look up the science.
So, but the thing is, it's always harm. Like, am I going to cause harm? Am I going to solve the problem? Right? A lot of medications are like that. So you're always balancing that up. Will I solve my problem and not harm anything?
Sometimes,
and I think there's a lot of risk for harm with that.
Yeah, sometimes I just think that a lot of these products are recommended by vets and by like pet stores is because they have always been around. So I think there's a commonality with these products that people just feel like, oh,
comfortable.
They're comfortable with them. They've always been around, so they must do a thing. So we keep selling them. So I think that it may just be a case of like maybe they just haven't looked into it, and it's just always been there, so they don't really question it so much. And that's
and I think on the other side of that, the problem is really difficult. Like getting rid of mites, getting rid of lice. It's a difficult thing. Those little buggers develop resistance.
Yeah, we're going to do an entire talk on that, parasite control, because that's actually quite a massive subject. So we will do another one of these for that.
Well, for some of you who didn't make the last one, we did one just on red mites. And we talked to Chris Thompson. He's the one of the owners of Bioforce. And he talks a lot about it. It's a good one. We can send you the link if you need.
Why is garlic good for chickens?
There's a lot of great stuff about garlic. So penicillin is a mold, right? Penicillin is where we got some of our first antibiotics from. You can't eat a lot of penicillin and get the effects of the antibiotic. You have to process penicillin to get those chemicals out that are the actual benefit of it. Garlic has a lot of that too. That has a lot of chemicals in there that are quite antibacterial and things like that. A whole garlic will more than likely not have enough concentration of those chemicals to affect an organism that is competing to survive in the gut. There's a lot of great stuff coming out with nutraceuticals and stuff, and
we love that subject.
We love those because it's new science. It's challenging old ideas.
There's some really great ones. It's the same with cinnamon bark, like cinnamon aldehyde. You've got like carvacrol from oregano oil, which is one we love. With thyme, like thymol. We have a product that has these in it as well. We're hoping to improve that one probably this year, actually. But like we love these products, and there is some amazing evidence coming out around their use. I mean, again, you have to use them quite frequently, but like they will fill a different gap, I think, in the market coming up.
Yeah, over here, if you've got antibiotics and sterility and those heavy duty chemicals, and then you should have a range of other products and varying effects. And we're learning how to not only use antibiotics less, but use them much more effectively. Targeted. And then we're looking at all the sort of other alternatives. And part of the problem with a lot of the alternatives is generating good science that shows that they have an effect, and that effect can be replicated in a lot of cases. And a lot of these products are not there yet, like the essential oils. There's a lot of cool stuff happening there. Probiotics, there's a lot of cool stuff happening. Prebiotics, like medium chain fatty acids, those are like, I use those almost entirely in the poultry production stuff that we do to replace in-feed antibiotics. For those of you who don't know, like in New Zealand, a lot of the birds used to be on prophylactic antibiotics. Over the years, we've reduced that to the point where if you were comparing like a kg of human to a kg of chicken in the country, they use 13 times less antibiotics on a per kg basis. And we've been doing that by looking at all these sort of basics, looking at the alternatives, the water acidification, the probiotics.
It's like there's not ever a one and done solution for a lot of these things. Like we do have to look at these like different pieces to a very big puzzle. Like there's not one thing that's going to fix like or be the solution to a problem. Like we have to,
it's not simple anymore.
Yeah, we have to look at all the different pieces. There's a couple in here that I think kind of will probably have the same answer.
Okay.
Why do my chickens eat horse poo and why do my chickens eat pine shavings?
Oh, yeah.
Generally because they are at the bottom of the run and they're probably not getting enough food.
Yeah, well,
it's probably
if you were to look at, hand on heart and have a look at their crops on a regular basis, chances are Gemma's right. Like the ones that don't get enough food have to go look for other things to eat.
And they tend to eat flooring material. And we do see that a lot in the industry.
Fibrous material is kind of like the key. They'll pick up feathers, they'll pick up like pine shavings, they'll pick up stuff off the ground, trying to satiate and get those nutrients that they need. They will eat a lot of, like birds are caprophagic, which means they eat droppings. So if they're eating a lot of horse poo, they're picking up a lot of that protein, a lot of those volatile fatty acids.
A lot of birds will do that. I mean, there's just like nutrients in there. So
yeah,
they're just trying to regurge and reuse the
nutrients.
Yeah.
And this is where like the crude protein, like if you're having a lot of crude protein in the diet, a lot of it just comes out in the droppings, and a lot of birds will go back and eat that. And that's how like parasite worm burdens were sort of enforced, how they came about.
Got a question about feeding chickens oatmeal porridge in cold mornings, also feeding raw meat or dog roll. Actually, we're big candidates. We don't mind this.
Like listen, raw meat, again, food safety is important. If you've got like a raw meat that's been sitting on the counter for 3 days,
or it's old and you don't want to eat it,
then
don't feed it to them.
Don't feed it to them. Like, they will get sick.
Like raw meat is not a problem. Like as long as it's like been stored correctly.
Hygiene.
Like, we eat raw meat. It's not problematic. So them eating it is definitely not problematic. I mean, as said before, that chicken that eats mice, like
poor hygiene. The other sort of bugbear is hygiene. Like the number one thing that you could probably do for your chooks is making sure that their coop, their food bowl is hygienic as possible. Keeping it clean keeps you safe from things like Campylobacter and Salmonella, keeps them safe from things like that.
Yeah, like you wouldn't want to throw food on your toilet room floor and then eat it off there yourself. So don't do it to them.
Well,
essentially. Just like a lot of food is perfectly fine, and like dog roll and mince, like it's cheap protein, and to be honest, like during molt or like cold times or coming into lay, like it's a really nice additive to just give them that little bit extra as well.
You've got to get to know them, picking them up, feeling under their feathers, getting them used to being around you. Those are all great things to kind of keep an eye on them.
Biosecurity risk with raw food.
Oh yeah, food safety is huge, guys. So for the same reason, you should be keeping a good eye on your pellets or the food that you're feeding them. If you cut corners around biosecurity in terms of food safety, like if you're feeding them, like old pig farmers and stuff way back when used to, and some of them still do, feed food scraps to pigs. Pigs are notorious for that. But dairy cattle and stuff too, like a lot of bakery goods and stuff can go to dairy cattle. Those still need to meet a certain basic hygiene standard.
Pretty much you don't have to question that if it's a case of like, is it for sale for human consumption? Because if it's for sale for human consumption, then it's more than likely.
We have a lot of laws around that.
We have a lot of laws around like human grade food. Like they are way stricter than anything that's out there for animals. So if it's human grade food, like human grade mince, human grade whatever, like it's
follow your basic best by date
fresh,
stuff.
Yeah, if it's fresh or like before its date, then there's nothing wrong with it at all.
But like the thing is, thing still too with mints, like if you are eating raw mints, like there are still food safety issues. So, you know, you're not going to get away from that either. You can always, you know, obviously cook it and reduce that risk. But, and that's what they did with pigs and cattle. Like if they are fed food scraps, they have to be cooked at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time to ensure that there is nothing in there that will cause those animals to get sick or be passed on in the food chain to humans.
What can you suggest dish feed so you don't feed every single sparrow in the neighborhood? This is actually why I don't like any of the feeding systems. I actually just prefer to just give them there's some good ones, but like I just prefer just to do them the one feeding in the morning and then letting them go for the day, because then you don't actually have food out all the time, or you just come out with whatever feeding system you've got, let them eat for like the hour in the morning, and then you take it away.
So there's a lot. I'm not going to get prescriptive. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat in this one.
Or like feeding them in their coop. And then that being the only place to get fed, and then they get let out to go.
It's always got to be a balance. Sparrows and rats, they survive by being cunning, and you may not get away from that. All I'm trying to suggest to you is that the feeding space is important to making sure all the birds get fed. Okay, so you know, I'm not going to tell you that you're going to need X amount of feeders and X amount of this or that, because it's going to really vary on how you feed and when. And there's a lot of ways around getting around that spacing requirement in a small flock. Okay.
I have clipped one wing of one of my hens, and she can still fly over the neighbor's fence. Yeah, they will.
They will.
Yeah, they will. They've got.
You can clip both of them, and they'll still get over the fence.
They're not great flyers, but they've got a rapid wing movement, and that enough allows them to propel themselves. So, like clipping wings doesn't tend to do much for any bird.
We've seen them scale chain link fence just with their legs.
Yeah, if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
Like, clearly they want to go see your neighbor for a reason.
Yeah.
Maybe she's giving them mealworms.
Yeah, probably. These are great questions, guys, by the way.
I did have another one up here that I think I missed.
Yeah.
Anything you recommend in the diet for preventing worms? So you can't prevent worms. We will do a real big talk on this.
Actually, you can prevent worms. You're not going to like the answer. Yeah. The reason why a lot of the farms, especially poultry farms, went into sort of cage and went into sort of indoor farming was because of worms and coccidiosis.
Yes, that's why we have those systems in the first place.
That's why we have those systems in the first place.
If you don't want your chickens in cages and barns, there is no way to prevent worms. Like, they come in through so many different means.
So means.
So, like, again,
earthworms, snails, sparrows, other like wild birds.
There's a lot of ways. Like, there are things that may help keep worm burdens down, and carvacrol, as we were talking about nutraceuticals before, is one of those things that does help keep burdens down. But like, if a burden's already getting out of control, or if a bird is like immune compromised, like the system gets taxed, and like any worms that they do have in there will kind of spiral out of control because the body is no longer able to keep the burden down. So like, the best thing to do is just to check. Like, we totally recommend checking. Like, we actually offer this service on our website and have done recently, just to give people access to getting fecal egg worm counts, because we think they're really important to do. And
they're helpful, very helpful.
So it just means that you can take like a sample of droppings, put it in a Ziploc bag, and mail it straight off to the lab, and they'll get back to you within a day or two with what worms you've got, and if you've got a coccidiosis burden of any description, and we will give you a recommendation on what worm is to use. Like, it's really important to worm birds, and actually to have a worming program working. I mean, we're not saying prophylactically throw worming products at your bird.
No.
You can burn chemicals pretty easily, and
you can waste a lot of money doing prophylactic treatment. You can do it. There's nothing wrong with it, but you may also be treating stuff that's not there.
Yeah, you can get resistant worms.
You can get resistant worms. If you're not looking, you don't know what problem you have. So if you're using a chemical that's just for roundworms, and there's a lot of them that just do roundworms, you know, you may have a tapeworm problem. And there's a whole bunch of tapeworms.
Yeah.
You may not see their effect.
Another reason we like to check for worms is because there are worms that you get that bring in other parasites as well that can't be treated with wormers. So it's kind of nice to know that you have those or not, because those can do some pretty significant damage.
We'll probably do a talk just on histaminiasis because it is a silent disease that a lot of people don't know they have.
We do see it quite a lot. So it's just good to check.
Yeah, that one comes in off capillarial worms or cecal worms, heterachus. And that heterachus worm comes in through earthworms. So if your bird is out in the garden eating earthworms and you have histaminiasis in your area, then your bird was probably picking it up.
Yeah. So just check. It's definitely easiest. And even if you do have a worming program, like flubanol's one of those ones for us that we always recommend you check if you're using that, because flubanol, the powder, was designed to be put into pellets so that birds got a specific amount. But when you're mixing a small amount of powder into a lot of pellets, you can't guarantee on the outside you can't guarantee its dosing, because it all falls to the bottom, and like it doesn't coat evenly.
Yeah, you just don't know what your concentration
so like, especially if you're using that one, and I understand the love of using that one because it's got a zero egg withhold, but like if you are using that one, check afterwards just to make sure it's working, because you can be using that one for years and just not checking, and you can have some really mad resistance building up in the background there.
Or histaminiasis. We've been noticing a lot of that. So
so check.
Check. Looking is good.
Awesome. All right, if that's everyone's questions, we'll wrap this up.
If there's more in there, we'll do some other ones, and hopefully that'll come up in other talks.
We'll post this talk up on our page, and also the PDF as well. We'll have that available if anyone wants it.
Yeah, but thanks for coming, guys. We'll say goodnight. Enjoy your Friday.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
And thanks for coming and see us today.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to stop our recording, huh?
Yeah.
Now we got to get all technical.